Hello, and welcome to the third part of our Running to the Roar series. And the first part was identifying your roar. Where does the roar cross your path? The second one is prepare for the roar and have the faith to look foolish. And today we're going to be talking about the third step, which is what Adino did and used when he fought 800 men. What Eleazar used when he stood his ground and swung the sword so much that it actually stuck to his hand. And what Benaiah did running after and into a pit on a snowy day. What did they use? Grab your coffee. It's going to be good. Welcome back. So what made these great men actually go after these things when all of the army of Israel was retreating? And Shammah goes in and stands in the middle of a field and fights the Philistines. When Eleazar goes after and swings his sword and it sticks so much that it sticks to his hand. And what about Adino, who's fighting 800 people and actually defeats 800 men at one time? Well, I believe it was courage. And so today we're going to be talking about what it takes actually to run after the roar that you've identified in your life and how you're having to prepare for that. And you're using faith that may look foolish in the middle of all that. So today we're going to be talking about David and his story and how he ran to the roar when he heard Goliath. So you have to remember what these men, were around or who they worked for. They worked for David, and David was a giant killer, and they knew that. And when you hang around giant killers, you become a giant killer. So let's look at David's roar. And this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting with verse 8. Let's read this. Then Goliath stood and cried out, crying out. Sounds like a roar to me. To the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine and you the servants of Saul? That was his first mistakes because they weren't the servants necessarily of Saul. They were the servants of Almighty God. Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we might fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words, the roar again, they're hearing this roar. Now listen what happens. Of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So the entire army of Israel was greatly dismayed and afraid, and it also included King Saul. Now, we can see through through Goliath's challenge here that this fight was for freedom in their nation, freedom for their individual lives. I mean, Goliath said, look, if I defeat you, then you're going to be my servants and our servants. And if you defeat us, we'll be yours. So it was a fight for freedom in their nation and also in their individual lives. Now, continue reading. Verse 16 says, and the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Very important point there because the roar is consistent. And it's relentless. And I know sometimes that if you're facing a roar in your life, it's going to be consistent and it may be even relentless towards you. Verse 17 says, then Jesse said to his son David, take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and 10 loaves and run to your brothers at the camp and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000 and see how your brothers fare and bring back news of them. So here's David's task. He's a cheese deliverer. It's kind of funny to me. He's actually not even going there to fight the battle or whatever's going on. He's just going there and was sent there to deliver cheese to the commander and then to bring back word on how things are going. I mean, that's the task that David is. He's just going about his day. He's delivering cheese, and then he hears the roar of Goliath. Now, he wasn't supposed to do anything, but within David, when he heard the defying roar, he responded. So let's keep reading here. Then David spoke to the men, this is verse 26, who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So here David he hears the roar. He begins to ask questions about the roar and, inquires about this. So his heart's being stirred to actually do something and wondering, why isn't anybody else doing anything? Because every single person in the army heard the roar, but no one is responding to take on the challenge. So let's keep reading. Verse 28, now Eliab, his oldest brother, now David's oldest brother gets involved, heard when he spoke to the men, and his anger aroused against David and said, why did you even come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? He's just belittling David here. And he says, I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down here to see the battle. Now, David wasn't being stirred to see the battle. David was being stirred to fight the battle. Let's keep reading. Verse 29, and David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? And Saul said to David in verse 33, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. So you can see now that David is, he's inquiring about the roar. He's wanting to do something about it, but his oldest brother, which was a leader in his household, and King Saul, a leader of the nation, is actually presenting obstacles and saying, you can't do this. And why are you doing this? And you've got too much pride, or you're too young, or all these excuses and obstacles that David is now facing from his leaders. And so David's got a response. He's got a decision to make. Am I going to listen to these negative things against me, or am I going to do what's in my heart to do? So let's keep reading. Verse 39, David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. So here's the opposition that David is facing to run to the roar. Number one, attack against his calling or purpose. His oldest brother questions why David is even there, and then tells him he should go back to the few sheep in the wilderness. So he's like really coming against him in this thing and accuses him of just wanting to see the battle. The second thing is there's an inward personal attack also from his brother. He says, I know your pride and insolence in your heart. Now, insolence is rude and disrespectful behavior. So David's being hit here, not only from his purpose, but also from his inside, from his brother saying, look, you got too much pride and you're insolent. Number three, there's an outward physical ability attack. And this comes from Saul, where he says, you're not able to fight this Philistine because you're too young. Another obstacle that David's facing. And then the fourth one is David has no natural protection. He literally tried on the armor and he couldn't use it. And so now he's going to go out and face this giant with no armor, no natural protection. So let me summarize. You can't do this, David, because you're not called to do this. You're too young to do this. You've got pride and your heart's not right because you're insolent and you're rude and disrespectful. You have no natural protection to do this. So here are the obstacles that David has to face. What about you? What are the obstacles that you're facing? Here, David faced some obstacles. What about you? I mean, are people telling you you're too young, you're too old, your heart's not right, or you don't have the ability to do this? What are the obstacles? Because you're going to face obstacles when you begin to run to the roar. It's bigger than you. Obviously, like I said, you've got to have faith to almost look foolish when you're going after that. David had faith to look foolish when he went after Goliath with all these things going against him, and even people that he respected telling him that he can't do this. So what obstacles are you facing? What limitations are you facing? And are you willing to overcome those limitations? See, David didn't care if he was called to defeat Goliath. He wasn't waiting around to be called. He just knew that anything that defied God, anything that came against unrighteousness, he was to fight against that. Can we have that same feeling? Do we have to wait around to be called to do something against unrighteousness? I don't believe so. I think that all of us hear the roar of unrighteousness, whether it's in human trafficking, whether it's in abortion, whether it's in your personal life, your marriage, or your kids, or whatever the roar is. Do you have to wait to be called to do that? I don't think so. I think you respond to the roar, because anything that comes against our God, anything that comes against righteousness, we have the authority and the power from Jesus to take it on and to overcome it. T.L. Osborne said that he never felt called to ministry. He just saw the need and responded to it. So here's David's response. He says that, is there not a cause or a reason to fight? I mean, David's looking at, look, there's a reason here. Let's go. Let's do something. Somebody stand up. Is there not a reason? When his brother said, look, I know your pride and instance, he's like, no, isn't there not a reason to do this? He was hearing the roar, and there was a good reason to fight. So verse 36 says, your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. So it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. He didn't walk, he ran to the roar. And that's our message. Run to that roar and fight and overcome. So what do we learn from David? Number one, we listen for the roar. Now, he was a cheese deliverer. He was just delivering cheese. He was doing his task that his father had sent him, but yet he heard the roar. And so many times that you and I, when we're just going about our day, that's when the roar can cross our path. We're not even planning on it. It just happens. It's one of those suddenlies that come into our life. So David was listening for the roar. Number two, he responded to the roar. Very important. Get off the sidelines. You have to fight. Do something about the roar. Number three, overcome your limitations. Don't listen to the I can'ts or the you can'ts, but resolve the I wills. Man, that's good. Now, you know what? I'm going to take a little drink of coffee right here. Number four, remember what God has already done in your life. David said, look, I've defeated the bear, I've defeated the lion, and I'm going to defeat this thing too. So remember what God's already done in your life, because it can give you courage to move forward in what's next. And the fifth thing is run to the roar, don't walk. When God allows you to hear the roar of the enemy, run to it. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Walk in the faith and the victory that God's already given you. All we have to do is get out there and fight. Remember, one of my favorite scriptures is that prepare the horse for battle, but God brings the victory. So here, we just got to prepare for the battle and fight, swing the sword. God will bring the victory for you. There's an old saying, it's not about the size of the dog in the fight, but it's the size of the fight in the dog. So I'm going to finish up here with a story about the Finland people. It's on November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union declared war on Finland. I'm going to read this so I don't get it wrong. The odds were against the Nordic country, only independent for 22 years. It had a total population of 4 million people. On the other hand, the Soviet army was 2.5 million soldiers strong, but by March of the next year, what became known as the Winter War was over, as the Soviet Union and Finland signed a peace treaty. How did such a tiny country hold off one of the greatest superpowers in history? It wasn't only a matter of mastering wintry terrain, it was a matter of attitude. The Finns have something they called sisu. The New York Times reported in 1940, it is a compound of bravado and bravery, of ferocity and tenacity, of the ability to keep fighting after most people would have quit. Sounds like the mighty men of David. And fight with the will to win. It is not so much about achievement as it is about facing your challenges with valor and determination. It's the mental strength that enables individuals to power on when they've reached the end of their physical resources. Sisu is your ability to take action against long odds. Your roar could be long odds. It could be a very high mountain to climb. It could be something very difficult that you don't feel that you have the ability to do it. God, if he's allowing you to hear the roar, he's equipping you with the power and the resources you need to take it on and to overcome it. I'm telling you, take the faith to look foolish, and God will meet you where you're at. 1 John 3:8, he who sins is of the devil, and for the devil has sinned from the beginning. Now, here's the point. For this purpose, the Son of God was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil. So as David's mighty men followed after their king's footsteps, they went after the giants just like David went after the giants. As they were following in their king's footsteps, we can follow in our king's footsteps. Now, I just read what our king has done. For this purpose, the Son of God was manifested that he may destroy the works of the devil. So what about us? Every time the lion roars, every time the devil comes and says something or cries out like Goliath, we can defeat him. God has already says that the purpose for Jesus to be manifested was to destroy the works of the devil. And we can destroy the works of the devil as well because Jesus has already given us the victory in that. So let me give you some discussion questions today as you discuss this. Number one, usually the roar is consistent and defies the kingdom of God. Have you identified what is consistently gnawing at you that is defying righteousness? Question number two. As David was going about his day, the roar came to him. What was his response? What was the rest of the army of the Lord's response? Number three, when we hear the roar, what should our response be? Number four, do we have to wait to be called to fight the enemy? Number five, discuss David's limitations or obstacles. Did that stop David? Number six, what has God done in your life already that you can gain hope and courage from? And number seven, what was ultimately in David that made him run to the roar of Goliath? Well, I hope you have a great discussion today. I'm telling you that God wants you to run to the roar, whatever is facing you, and don't be like the army of Israel that they heard the roar too, but didn't do anything because they were dismayed and greatly afraid. We do not have to fear because Jesus has already overcome. All we have to do is get out there, run to the roar, and sling our stones as well. So God bless you. Hope you have a great day today and a great discussion, and we'll see you in the next video.